In 793 AD, Viking warriors didn't just kill the holy women they captured at Lindisfarne Monastery. They performed a ritual so disturbing that when historians finally decoded the old Norse references in 1982, the lead researcher refused to publish his findings for 7 years. His colleagues called him a coward. He called it protecting the dignity of the dead. But here's what he discovered. And what I'm about to show you changes everything we think we know about Viking brutality. You think Theblood Eagle was the worst thing Vikings did? That's what they wanted their enemies to believe. What actually happened to captured priestesses involved 3 specific methods that were systematic, ritualized, and deliberately erased from the historical record. By the end of this video, you'll know the sacrifice ritual that combined 3 execution methods into one, and why it was reserved exclusively for religious women. The archaeological evidence from a mass grave in Ireland that wasn't fully excavated until 2003, because the church fought to keep it sealed, and the story of one Irish abbess who not only survived, but orchestrated revenge so calculated that it triggered the collapse of an entire Viking settlement. If you want the real history they don't teach in schools, hit that subscribe button right now, because this gets darker than any textbook will ever admit. Before we dive into the horror, you need to understand why this happened. And no, it wasn't just random violence. The Viking Age lasted from 793 to 1066 AD for nearly 3 centuries. Norse raiders targeted Christian holy sites with surgical precision. Monasteries, convents, churches. These weren't random targets. They were strategic. Why? 3 reasons. First, wealth. Monasteries hoarded gold, silver, jeweled relics, easy pickings for warriors who arrived by surprise from the sea. Second, psychological warfare. Destroy a people's holy sites, you destroy their will to fight. You make them believe even their God can't protect them. But here's the third reason nobody talks about, the one that explains everything you're about to hear. Religious ideology. This wasn't just about treasure or terror. This was a clash between 2 belief systems that saw each other as existential threats. Norse pagans believed Christian priests and priestesses wielded dangerous spiritual power, power that could curse their crops, ruin their raids, destroy their souls. And in Norse tradition, you don't just kill spiritual enemies, you unmake them. You strip away their power through ritual. You corrupt what makes them holy. You offer them to your gods as proof of supremacy. Now everyone knows about the blood eagle. That's the viral execution method. Ribs spread like wings, lungs pulled out. It's horrifying, sure, and it probably happened to a handful of high-profile male captives like King Aya of Northumbria. But what happened to holy women was different. It was systematic. Music, it was ritualistic. And it was deliberately erased from most histories. Historians call it the silence in Thesagas. Viking poetry and prose mention raids on monasteries constantly, but they go mysteriously quiet about the fate of captured women. That's not an accident. That's intentional omission. Because what actually happened was so brutal that even Viking poets, men who glorified battlefield carnage, chose not to write it down explicitly. But they left clues. Archaeological clues, genetic clues, and coded references that scholars have only recently begun to decode. You're about to learn why those silences speak louder than any saga ever could. Method number 1, the threefold death. Imagine you're a nun at a monastery in coastal Ireland. It's early morning, just after dawn prayers. You hear the bell ringing, not for worship, but in panic. By the time you reach the courtyard, it's too late. The Vikings are already inside. Now, here's what you need to understand. In Norse pagan tradition, there was a specific execution ritual reserved for enemies of the gods. Not warriors, not kings, but priests, shamans, and spiritual leaders. It's called the threefold death, and it combines 3 execution methods into a single ritual sacrifice. First, they strangle you. Not to death, just to the edge of unconsciousness. Your vision tunnels, your lungs burn, then they revive you. Second, they drown you. Held face down in freezing water, river, bog, or ritual pool until your body stops fighting, then they pull you back, force the water from your lungs. Third, they burn you sometimes while you're still breathing. Music, how do we know this happened? Because we've found the bodies. The Tolen man discovered in a Danish bog in 1950 showed signs of ritual execution. A leather noose still around his neck, evidence of drowning, partially burned remains. For decades, archaeologists assumed he was just one anomaly. But then in the 1990s and early 2000s, they started finding more, specifically in Ireland and Scotland. And here's the disturbing pattern. Many of these bodies were female. Many wore remnants of religious garments, and many showed signs of all three death methods. The Irish Annals, medieval chronicles written by monks, contain scattered references to what they called the triple death inflicted on captured nuns. One entry from 824 AD describes Viking raiders offering the Sisters of St. Bridge to their gods through water, rope, and flame. But here's what made this even more calculated. This wasn't done quickly. The ritual could take hours, sometimes an entire day, because the point wasn't just execution. It was spiritual warfare. By combining three death methods, Vikings believed they were offering the victim to three different gods: Odin hanging, strangling, any other drowning, and Loki burning. They were essentially crowdsourcing divine approval for the kill, and priestesses specifically. They were seen as the ultimate offering. You weren't just killing an enemy. You were sacrificing their connection to their god and channeling that power to your gods. One archaeological site in County Cork, Ireland, excavated in 2003, revealed a mass grave containing the remains of at least 17 women. All showed signs of strangulation. 12 showed signs of drowning. 9 showed burn trauma. The Catholic Church initially fought the excavation, claiming it was desecrating holy ground. But when genetic testing revealed these women were likely of religious orders, isotope analysis of their teeth showed they'd consumed mainly monastery diets, the horrifying truth became undeniable. This wasn't a random massacre. This was systematic ritual execution. But that's only method number one, because here's what nobody tells you. Some priestesses weren't killed immediately. Some were kept alive for months. And what happened to them during that time was somehow worse than any execution. Don't click away yet, because what I'm about to reveal explains why Vikings actually feared these women more than they feared armed warriors. And once you understand that fear, everything else makes horrifying. I know this is getting dark, but if you're still watching, if you're clearly someone who wants to understand history's brutal truths, not the sanitized version they teach in schools, make sure you're subscribed, because next week, I'm revealing what happened when Viking raiders encountered warrior nuns who fought back. And the archaeological evidence we found is going to blow your mind. Now, back to method number 2. Method number 2. Spiritual corruption. In Norse culture, there was a specific type of witch called a vulva. She performed Seda, a form of magic that involved altered states, prophecy, and rituals that modern historians tactfully describe as sexually charged. Seda was women's magic. Powerful magic. And here's the thing. Vikings believed Christian priestesses possessed similar power. They didn't see nuns as weak, passive victims. They saw them as enemy sorceresses whose spiritual weapons needed to be neutralized. So they developed a specific counter-ritual. They would force captured priestesses too. Participate in, say, the ceremonies. The goal wasn't just violation, though. That was part of it. The goal was corruption. They believed that by forcing a Christian holy woman to participate in pagan sexual magic, they could literally invert her spiritual power, or turn her divine connection into something profane. You think I'm exaggerating? Let me give you the sources. In 922 AD, an Arab traveler named Ibn Fadlan witnessed a Viking funeral ceremony on the Velour River. His account describes, in disturbing detail, how a slave girl was used in a ritual involving multiple warriors and a vulvar. At the end of his account, he notes, "They told me some women used for these rites were once Christian holy women taken from lands across the sea." That line was largely ignored by historians for centuries. Dismissed as probably exaggeration or cultural misunderstanding until 2019. That's when a genetic study of skeletal remains from Velva burial sites across Scandinavia revealed something shocking. Approximately 23% of women buried with Velva ritual objects, staffs, crystals, herbs, had genetic markers indicating British or Irish ancestry. Think about that. Nearly 1 in 4 Norse witches were actually foreign women. Women from Christian lands? Women who likely started their lives as nuns or priestesses. The Poetic Era, a collection of Old Norse poems, contains veiled references to dark-haired seeresses from the West. An unwilling Ver who served the gods of the North. For centuries, scholars treated these as poetic metaphor. They weren't metaphors. They were documentation. Here's how the system worked. When a priestess was captured, she'd be brought before the settlement's existing vulvar. The vulvar would assess whether the captive had sufficient spiritual strength to be worth corrupting rather than executing. If selected, the priestess would be forced through a series of rituals designed to break her Christian identity. Made to participate in ceremonies dedicated to Norse gods. Forced to consume hallucinogens used in Seda. Compelled to perform prophetic rituals for the very warriors who destroyed her monastery. The psychological torture was the point. They weren't just breaking her body. They were breaking her soul, making her complicit in paganism, forcing her to betray her god. And here's the cruelest twist. If she resisted, if she refused to participate, they'd threaten the other captured women. Perform the ritual, or we execute your sister. Prophecy for our chieftain, or we burn your fellow nun. One genetic study traced maternality age from modern Icelandic families back to a cluster of Irish women who arrived in Iceland between 85,900 AD. The isotope. Signatures in their teeth indicated monastery diets. Their burial sites included both Christian and pagan elements, crosses alongside Thor's hammers. These women lived in 2 worlds, neither by choice. But here's what none of the history books tell you. And here's why you need to keep watching. Some of these women found a way to weaponize their forced position. They learned the language, memorized the customs, gained trust, and then they struck. Wannabes, her name lost to history, but her actions preserved in a manuscript hidden for centuries, documented exactly how she turned captivity into calculated revenge. That manuscript was discovered in 1987, sealed in a wall of a monastery in Scotland. The church tried to music suppress it. Academics fought for 5 years to get access. What it revealed changed everything we thought we knew about Viking-era captive women. But before I tell you that story, you need to understand method number 3, because it's the most widespread, it's the most systematic, and the one that lasted for generations. Method number 3, the friller system. Friller. It's an Old Norse word that doesn't have a clean English translation. The closest would be concubine slave, but even that doesn't capture the full horror of what it meant. A frill was a woman kept as a permanent sexual slave, but with a specific purpose. She wasn't just for pleasure. She was for reproduction, for producing children who would carry Norse blood, but whose mothers would serve as permanent reminders of conquest and priestesses. They were specifically targeted for this system. Why? Think about the symbolism. You've conquered Christian lands. Now you're forcing their holy women, women who taken vows of chastity, who devoted their lives to God, to bear your children, to raise those children as pagans. It was genetic warfare wrapped in spiritual humiliation. Here's how it worked. When Viking raiders returned from Britain or Ireland, high-status warriors would claim priestesses as frill. The woman would be stripped of any religious garments. That happened immediately, part of the unmissioning process. She'd be given a new name, usually Norse, erasing her Christian identity. Then came the forced conversion ritual. She'd be brought before a shrine to Thor or Odin, made to swear oaths to the Norse gods, forced to participate in blood sacrifice ceremonies. If she refused, she wasn't executed. That would be too merciful. Instead, they'd starve her, lock her in darkness, subject her to systematic brutality until her will broke. And once she submitted, once she spoke the oaths and participated in the rituals, she was trapped because now she'd betrayed her god, at least in her own mind. The psychological prison was stronger than any chain. The Icelandic family sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age, but based on oral traditions contain dozens of references to thriller of Irish or Scottish origin. Historians used to read these as simple footnotes. Oh, Vikings took slaves. We know that. But modern analysis reveals patterns. First, genetic evidence. Contemporary studies of Icelandic populations show that approximately 62% of maternal lineage traces back to Britain and Ireland, while 80% of paternal lineage is Scandinavian. Think about those numbers. The math is brutal. Viking men brought massive numbers of women from Christian lands. Those women bore children. Those children became the foundation of Icelandic society. Second, music linguistic evidence. Old Icelandic contains dozens of Irish loanwords specifically related to domestic life, childrening, and religious concepts. This suggests that Irish women, likely including educated monastery women, had significant influence in households despite their slave status. Third, church records. After Iceland officially converted to Christianity around 1000 AD, priests began documenting cases of recovered nuns. Women who'd been taken decades earlier, who'd lived as friller, who'd raised pagan children, but who still identified internally as Christian. One record from 1023 describes a woman named Orthair who approached a missionary priest claiming she was Sister Aoife of Kildare, taken by Kettle. Flattens, in the year of our Lord, 852. She was 71 years old. She'd been a friller for 50 years. She'd borne 7 children, all raised pagan, and now she wanted absolution. The priest's music wrote, she wept ceaselessly, saying she had not forgotten her vows, but had been powerless to keep them. Her children did not believe her past. Her grandchildren thought her mad. This wasn't one isolated story. Records suggest hundreds of such women existed living contradictions. Christian souls in pagan households, raising children for the very culture that had destroyed their lives. But here's what none of those records capture: the quiet resistance. Because some friller didn't just survive. They infiltrated. They influenced. They remembered. And when? They remembered. And when? The opportunity came, they acted. You want to know the real reason Iceland converted to Christianity so relatively peacefully compared to other Norse territories? It wasn't just missionaries. It wasn't just trade pressure. It was generations of Irish and Scottish mothers whispering to their half-Norse children about a different God, a different way, keeping the faith alive in secret, waiting for the moment when that seed could finally grow. But that's the long game, the generation alley. One group of women didn't want to wait generations. They wanted revenge now. And what they did was so effective, so calculated, so devastating, that it triggered the complete collapse of a Viking settlement and forced Norse raiders to completely change their tactics for decades afterward. Don't click away, because the story I'm about to tell you is documented in 2 sources. The official annals of Altar and a secret monastery version that wasn't supposed to survive. The year is 825 AD. The place is Iona, a tiny island off the Scottish coast that housed one of the most important monasteries in Celtic Christianity. Vikings had raided Iona repeatedly since 795 AD. By 825, they'd established a semi-permanent settlement on the island. They'd captured approximately 30 nuns and priestesses, some from Iona itself, others from mainland raids. The Vikings kept them as frill, standard procedure. But these women were different because Iona wasn't just any monastery. It was a center of learning. These women could read and write in multiple languages: Latin, Old Irish, some even knew Norse. They'd been trained in medicine, herbalism, and monastery administration. They were educated, connected, and very, very patient. Here's what we know from the official annals of Altar. Entry for 825 AD. The settlement of the Norseale on Iona fell to ruin. The chieftain Blan and his kin perished of a sickness. The longships departed and did not return for 7 years. That's it. That's the official story. A mysterious sickness. Settlement abandoned. End of entry. But in 1987, during renovation of St. Columbus's Music Monastery in Scotland, workers discovered a sealed chamber in the wall. Inside a manuscript, a different version of events written by someone who was there. The manuscript's author identifies herself only as a maidservant of Christ, witness to his justice. Modern historians believe AM was likely Abbess Muan, who disappeared from Irish church records around 824 AD, right when Hona was raided. Here's what the manuscript reveals. The captured women weren't just surviving, they were organizing. Abbess Muan, if that's who I'm secretly maintained a network among the captive women. They used their forced positions in Norse households to gather intelligence. Who was loyal to whom? Which warriors held grudges, where weapons were stored, where food was kept, and they waited. The manuscript describes how they identified the settlement's Velva. Remember the Norse wise woman as a potential weakness. She was old, losing her sight, and relied heavily on the captured women to prepare her ritual herbs and music medicines. So, they prepared something extra. The manuscript gets specific. We gathered the water hemlock from the north shore and the deathcap mushrooms from the dark wood, and we prepared them as she had taught us to prepare healing draughts. Water hemlock, deathcap mushrooms, both deadly. Both with symptoms that mimic natural illness, fever, seizures, organ failure. Both with delayed onset, meaning the poison couldn't be easily traced back to a specific meal. They didn't just poison the vulvar. That would have been too obvious. They poisoned the ritual feast the Verva was preparing for the chieftain's family. The manuscript continues. On the night of their heathen celebration, they gorged themselves in honor of their false gods. The Lord enacted his vengeance. By dawn, 7 lay dead. By the 3rd day, 12 more had perished, including the chieftain Blan and his 2 sons. But here's the brilliant part. The captured women made it look like divine punishment. Remember, these were educated monastery women. They understood Norse beliefs. They knew Vikings feared spiritual retribution from wronged enemies. So while the poisoning took hold, the women started spreading whispers. This is God's judgment. You've slaughtered his servants, desecrated his altar, and now he strikes back. They cited Christian prophecies. They pointed to signs. A red sky, a stillborn calf, a raven landing on Nikfatane's hall. They created a narrative of divine wrath. And it worked. The manuscript describes panic spreading through the settlement. Warriors refused to eat. Some fled immediately, believing the entire island was cursed. The remaining Velva, a younger woman, declared that the spirits of the murdered nuns had corrupted the land itself. Within 2 weeks, the settlement was abandoned. But the revenge didn't stop there. According to the manuscript, when Irish kings finally ransomed some of the surviving women, those women carried detailed intelligence. Names of Viking leaders, descriptions of settlements, details about raid schedules and ship counts. They became informants, spies. The manuscript's final entry reads, 7 of our sisters returned to the Irish kings, bearing knowledge of our enemies. This knowledge led to victories at sea. The Lord turned our captivity into his weapon. Let Irish annals from 826,832 show a dramatic increase in successful Irish counter-aids against Viking settlements. Ships intercepted before they could attack. Coastal camps surprised and destroyed. The Vikings, who'd operated with near impunity for decades, suddenly found their enemies one step ahead. How much of that was due to intelligence from formerly captured priestesses? We can't know for certain, but the pattern is striking. And here's the final piece of evidence. After the Iona incident, Viking raid tactics changed. The annals show they started killing religious women outright, rather than taking them captive. Quick executions instead of extended captivity. Why the change? Because the Vikings had learned a brutal lesson. Educated, motivated women with nothing left to lose and months to plan. Music, they're more dangerous than any warrior. So, let's circle back to where we started. 3 methods, 3 different fates, 3 different levels of horror, the threefold death. Ritual execution as divine offering, spiritual corruption. Forced participation in enemy religion, the Friller system. Generations of genetic and cultural conquest, but also 3 revelations. Physical brutality was only one layer. The psychological and spiritual warfare ran deeper. The silence in the sagas wasn't accidental. Vikings were documenting their victories, not their fears. And these women made them afraid. And the truth historians hide. Religious women weren't just victims. Music, some found ways to resist. Some turned captivity into intelligence. Some enacted revenge that literally changed the course of Viking expansion. The numbers are staggering when you add them up. Irish annals document raids on over 400 religious sites between 793 and 1066, if each site housed even 5 women on average. And most housed far more. That's over 2,000 captured priestesses. Add in monastery raids across Britain, Scotland, and continental Europe. We're looking at thousands more. Most never made it home. Most died in ritual sacrifice, or from brutality during captivity, or simply disappeared into the Friller system. Their Christian identities erased, but their impact lasted. The genetic legacy is indelible. Modern Icelanders carry the DNA of captured Irish and Scottish women in their maternal lines. The cultural legacy is traceable. Ireland's medieval chronicles show Vikings shifting tactics after targeted intelligence losses, suggesting sustained resistance networks and the religious legacy. Iceland and Greenland converted to Christianity more rapidly than any other Norse territory, helped by generations of secret faith kept alive by captive women. This isn't ancient history. This is a story about what happens when faith becomes a weapon on both sides. When spiritual beliefs justify atrocity, when human beings are reduced to symbols in an ideological war, it's about how we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. For centuries, the Viking Age was romanticized. Brave explorers, mighty warriors, advanced culture. And yes, that's part of the truth. But the other part, the part about systematic brutality against captive women, got quietly edited out of the popular narrative because it's uncomfortable, because it complicates the story, because it forces us to confront the full humanity of people we'd rather think of as either pure victims or pure villains. But those women were neither. They were nuns and priestesses who prayed for deliverance. They were victims of horrific violence. But some were also poisoners, spies, and saboteurs who fought back with every weapon they had. They were human beings trapped in an inhuman situation, and they responded with everything from quiet faith to calculated revenge. So here's my question for you. Which shocked you most? The ritualized executions that erased their religious identity, the systematic corruption that forced them to betray their beliefs, or the frill system that turned them into weapons of generational conquest? Or was it the uprising? The moment when some of these women stopped being victims and became agents of vengeance? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me which part of this story hit you hardest and why. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone you hope can handle history's brutal truths. So, make sure you're subscribed because next week I'm diving into the flip side of this story. What happened to the rare Viking warriors who chose mercy? Who spared priestesses? Who broke ranks? Spoiler there, fellow Vikings didn't take it well. And what happened to them is its